Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter, verses 21 through 32. Jesus said to his disciples, "You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go, first be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." The Gospel of the Lord. Preach the gospel every day, and if you must, use words. When did Jesus say that? He didn't. This is what one of his later followers said, someone we know as St. Francis of Assisi, a man whose life was changed by the word and witness of Jesus, God in person. So, what is the connection with today's gospel text? How does what St. Francis says, preach the gospel every day, and if you must, use words, how does what he says and how he lived show us anything about the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus was actively interpreting the scriptures, right? He teaches from the law and the prophets what the faithful had heard read in the temple, had heard read in the synagogues all their lives. He reminds his apprentices of what they had been taught that God requires. And then, Jesus opens a window to let the breeze of Holy Spirit breath blow in. Jesus wants God's people to hear and to see how much more fully we're called to live God's ways than simply checking off the letter of the law. Well, St. Francis, in his younger life, had struggled with learning what was right and wrong, as we often want to simply reduce God's dream for creation to be. When Francis, who had been very wealthy and lived a life that paid no attention to people who struggled just to survive, when Francis came to an epiphany, and aha in his life. Everything changed. Francis came to realize that our choices, our actions, yes, even our motives and deepest intentions, they all make a difference. Not only for the way other people experience what we do and say, but also for who we become as our truest selves. When Francis faced the misery and suffering of people who had leprosy, of people living in the death-like grip of poverty, something made him wake up. The life Francis lived, the man he became by being a practicing apprentice of Jesus' ways, shows a 180-degree turn in a new direction from the way he had been as a spoiled rich kid. From a guy who saw poor people, sick people, enslaved people as dispensable, as having no value to him. Oh, when he came to know Jesus and the way Jesus lived, Francis spoke entirely differently, met people differently, helped people differently, healed and forgave people differently. He was changed by Jesus' love and grace. Now he begins to see all God's children as created to be indispensable, treasured, beloved, not only by God, but all who live by God's light. See, Jesus showed us that life is God's gift, and it's precious, so precious, we must not deny it to ourselves or to others. It's not only that we live Jesus' way by not causing someone else's death, say, but we live Jesus' way by working to help someone else keep their life and live it more abundantly. You see, for Francis, preaching the gospel could mean bringing a change of clothes and some food to a leper whom no one else would go near out of fear of the disease. He would not have to say a word. His actions preached Jesus' love. Now Jesus healed and brought relief to many as he walked in Galilee, as he traveled out in the cities beyond Israel, where Jews were often considered feared outsiders. Jesus lived and demonstrated what God's grace looks like. And his 12 apprentices, we'll call them disciples or followers to ourselves, but they learned as much by seeing Jesus give himself away as by hearing him teach. By the way, the Hebrew word, talmid, is often translated disciple or student, but it means more than that. Because a student usually just learns about a subject. No, a talmid means an apprentice, one who practices and learns to do as the master does, as the teacher lives. It's part of the reason Jesus sent his chosen to go out to towns and villages ahead of his arrival sometimes, so that they might experience God's power to touch and change lives firsthand in their own personal actions. Jesus was not just a teacher who gathered students to recite their lessons. He wanted lives to change. And that's Jesus' deepest desire for all of us right now as we live. Don't just pat yourself on the back because you never killed anybody with a weapon. Go deeper, says Jesus. If your anger, if hate against someone has boiled up inside of you so that you even would wish that person dead, realize that you have become one who has a murderer's heart. And worse than that, take steps. You might take steps to do something harmful to the person. Jesus says it's time to change, to reconcile, to create a new relationship that fosters the best of life for that other indispensable child of God who is as precious as you are to the Lord of life. Guess what? You'll not only mend the brokenness between you, your boiling anger will no longer boil. You'll save yourself from high blood pressure and hypertension. In other words, you could heal too. Jesus understands the purpose of God's laws, God's teaching, God's ways to be about health and life and well-being. Always, always to provide for community that can live together abundantly. Through the power of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost, you remember those 12 apprentices of Jesus truly began to live as Jesus did, knowing each life is God's gift, an indispensable person of worth, regardless of our opinions. It only takes seeing the 180-degree difference in the lives of Peter and the others, later in the life of Paul, who had been Saul, and much later still in a life we know as St. Francis. Throughout the history of the ways of God, the power of God's grace makes all the difference. Listen to this story that was told by an old colonel in the Austrian army. I was commanded, he began, to march against a little town in the Tyrol and lay siege to it. We had been meeting some stubborn resistance in that part of the country, but we felt sure that we should win because all the advantages were on our side. My confidence, however, was arrested by a remark from a prisoner we had taken. He said, "You will never take that town, for they have an invincible leader." "What does that fellow mean?" I asked my staff. "Who's this leader he's talking about?" Nobody seemed able to answer my question. And so in case there should be some truth to that report, I doubled up the preparations. We descended through the pass in the Alps, and I saw with surprise there were cattle grazing in the valley, and women and children were out there working in the fields. So were the men. Either they were not expecting us, or this is a trap to catch us, I thought. So we drew nearer to the town, and we passed people just walking down the road. They smiled. They greeted us with a friendly word and went about their way. Finally, we, the whole army, reached the town and clattered up the cobble-paved streets with our colors flying, horns sounding a challenge, arms in readiness. Women came to the windows. They were holding babies in their arms. They just looked. Well, they held the babies a little closer, but they went about their tasks. Even so, no panic, no confusion. What was going on? It was impossible to keep strict discipline of my troops. I began to feel pretty foolish. My soldiers answered the questions of the children, and I saw one old warrior of mine throw a kiss to a little golden-haired girl on a doorstep. "She looks just about the size of my Lisa," he said. Still, no sign of an ambush. We rode straight to the open square in the town, near the town hall. Here, if anywhere, surely resistance would be expected. Just as I had reached the hall and my guard was drawn up to attention, an old white-haired man, who by his insignia he wore seemed to be the mayor, came forward to me, and there were 10 men in simple peasant costume with him. They all looked dignified. They were unabashed by the armed force before them, some of the most terrible soldiers of the great and mighty army of Austria. The mayor walked down the steps straight to my horse's side, and he put out his hand and said, "Welcome, brother." One of my aides made a gesture as if to strike him down with his sword, but I saw by the face of the old mayor this was no trick on his part. I demanded, "Where are your soldiers?" "Soldiers? Why, don't you know we have none?" he replied in wonder, as though I'd asked, "Where are your giants?" or "Where are your dwarves?" I said, "But we have come to take over this town." "Well, no one will stop you," said the mayor. "What? Are there none here who would fight?" At this question, the old man's face just lit up with a smile, and I'll always remember that smile. Often afterwards, when I was engaged elsewhere in bloody warfare, I would suddenly see that man's smile before me, and somehow I came to hate my business in the army. His words spoke simply. No, there's no one here to fight. We have chosen Christ for our leader. He taught us another way. Hey, there seemed nothing left for us to do but ride away and leave that town unharmed. It was impossible to take it. If I had ordered my soldiers to fire on these smiling men and women and children, they would not have obeyed me, I'm sure. Even military discipline has its limits. Could I command the grisly soldier to shoot down the child who reminded him of his Lisa? So I reported to headquarters that the town had offered unassailable resistance, although that actually hurt my military reputation. But I was right. We had literally been conquered by these simple folk who followed their leader, Jesus Christ. And I said, preach the gospel every day, and if you must, use words.